Okay, perfect. We're ready to go. So welcome everyone. I hope everyone here is well. Thank you very much for joining us today for our session about text and data mining of copyright evidence. So I'm Amy Thomas. I'm the managing editor of the Copyright Evidence Wiki, and I'm here today with Martin Kretschmer and Chris Eriksson, who are both chairs and founders of the wiki, and also Bartolomeo Maletti, our creative director for the project. We are all members of the Create Centre based at the University of Glasgow. I'll just put our URL in here. And this project that we're presenting today is a project of the AHRC Creative Industries Policy and Evidence Centre, or the PEC as it's more affectionately known. So the session today is going to be focusing on copyright and its relevance to the creative industry. So specifically, we're going to be talking about how, as members of the creative industries, you can understand the wealth of knowledge that we have about how copyright works in society and how you can understand its effects on your world. So we're asking important questions like, how does copyright affect fan communities, for example? Or is there any evidence to suggest that content filters on sites like YouTube help reduce piracy or give creators more money? And in short, just how can we make copyright law work best to promote the creative industry? So these are the sort of important questions that we hope can be solvable through our work. And whilst copyright, I think, can be quite a technical, sometimes intimidating area, we hope that our kind of open and transparent and user-led approach makes this something that everyone can engage in. So excitingly for us, this is also the official public launch of our copyright evidence portal, which, as the title of our session suggests, is a data mineable catalogue of empirical studies about copyright. So this is the tool that we hope can answer all those important questions for you. In terms of the structure of the session, we want to spend the first half telling you a little bit about how the project came to be, starting with the early days with Martin and Chris. Then I'll be talking about the Copyright Evidence Wiki itself, which is the sort of central pillar for the project, how it works, how it's organised. And then Bart will be talking to you a little bit about how this sits in the bigger project alongside a really valuable visualisation tool, and how the evidence portal can be used in reality. And the second half of the session, we'll be inviting more interactivity and delivering on our promise to pose your own topical questions about copyright and discover your own findings using these tools. You're of course welcome to ask questions at any time throughout the chat function, but if you have any suggestions or comments about how we can improve the project, we would certainly love to hear it either now or at the end in the Q&A session. But for now, I'm going to hand over to our founders, Martin and Chris, to talk a little bit about the inspiration behind the Copyright Evidence project. And I will share my slides with you now. Okay. Okay, can everyone see that?
Yeah.
Yep.
So, Chris, are you kicking off? Well, I can start it, that's fine. So, I became interested in copyright law in the mid-1990s. So we could really say we have 25 years of perpetual crisis of copyright law. So in the mid-1990s, there was almost a moral panic, the end of the creative industries. Piracy would take over. We could no longer fund creative production. There was the dichotomy between information wants to be free. Wine can't be put back into bottles, and on the other hand, the rhetoric of piracy as the end of creativity. And you can pinpoint it pretty much to the launch of the Navigator web browser and the MP3 technology in the context of the music industry. So up to then, copyright policy really happened in the back room. It was lawyers at the background of big conferences who negotiated the next arrangement, and suddenly it became a topic which was central to how society operates, how the infrastructure of the creative industry is regulated. So suddenly we needed evidence, but we did not have any. So therefore, copyright policy was really shaped by anecdotes. And when we set up the Create Center at the University of Glasgow, one of our projects was to change that. And that's where the idea for this kind of catalog of the wiki came about. Because the evidence may come from psychology, it may come from computer science, it may come from social science, it may come from empirically minded lawyers. It was dispersed, in very different disciplines, and therefore hard to find. But it was also a new discipline, and therefore we could still catalog the complete knowledge. So what we claim now is that we actually reflected the complete knowledge about the empirical context of copyright in what you will now see. So there are 800 studies. So we can go to slide number 2 now. Okay, so Chris, are you back on sound?
Can you hear me?
Yeah.
You can hear me. Okay.
So basically, I introduced the motivation for the wiki and the contested nature of copyright policy during the 1990s and how we started the project.
Great. Yeah. So hi, everybody. So yeah, sorry about that. My name is Chris. I'm an academic researcher. I'm really interested and excited to be part of this project because it's about, for me, it's about communicating all this rich data that academic researchers have sort of been building up about copyright's effects for consumers, for creators, for businesses. And it's kind of all spread around, or it's buried in dusty libraries, and it's not something that people can access easily. We've tried to bring it all together in one place. And as Martin said, hopefully in a way that's useful for different stakeholders like policymakers or you working in the creative industries, whatever it may be. We've chosen the Wikimedia platform as the platform to host all this stuff because we kind of envisioned the project a bit like Wikipedia. We wanted to have it be transparent, be open to review so that you can see how pages are added, and you know how Wikipedia allows you to see the edits that have happened over time. We feel like that adds to the transparency of this whole thing because we really want this to be a central reference point for folks to access data about copyright. Because copyright is such a contested policy area and there's so many interests involved, we're really keen on transparency. We also like the user-led orientation of the Wikimedia platform, which you'll see in a moment, which allows others to contribute. So there we have facilities on the platform for folks to submit new studies. If they become aware of a study of copyright's effects that have not been indexed on our wiki, they can contribute by sharing that link, and it'll become indexed over time in the system. And we tried to find peer review and validation from external observers. We have a huge editorial board, which spans a number of different countries and different sectors of external advisors who have been giving us guidance about the direction of the Copyright Evidence Wiki and how to try to vet the neutrality of all of the many contents which are contained there. Amy, shall we go on to slide number 3? Thanks. So in terms of this session and what we're hoping to get from you all in the audience, we'd like to get as much as possible your perspectives from your particular sector. We'd like to know what your industry questions and concerns about copyright might be, to see if those are reflected in the corpus of studies which are contained in the wiki. Like, have these questions been addressed by academic researchers? Maybe, maybe not, and we'll investigate that a bit later on. We'd love to know what's different or interesting about your particular sector or niche. As you'll see, there's been lots of studies of like music piracy or film and such, but there may be other creative sectors where there hasn't been as much attention paid to the copyright issues. So we'd love to know if there are any in your particular area. And let us know, as well, how we might better provide you with useful and actionable information via the wiki, because it's really our goal to make this, like I said, a kind of a touch point, a central resource for members of the public to access and use. So as useful as we can make it for you, the better. That's about it for just what I wanted to say as an introduction. I'll hand it back to you, Amy, and hopefully we can have a little demo of the wiki.
Yes. No, thank you very much, Chris. Thank you, Martin, for that lovely introduction. So as I mentioned at the outset, I'm the managing editor of the Copyright Evidence Wiki, which you can hopefully see here. I started this role back in 2017, and basically I'm responsible for its ongoing maintenance, trying to source new studies, making sure that we can add them and that it's accurate and up to date. And I'm just going to give you a little demo, a little walkthrough of the wiki itself so that you can get a feel for how it works and how it's organised. And at the outset, I think that one thing that I want to sort of stress is and to appreciate is the scale of this project. So we've documented over 800 empirical studies relating to copyright. So you can get a little flavour for that here, just by this kind of dominating wall of text. So what we know about copyright and how it works in society. This gives you an appreciation of how large this body of knowledge is. And I think that it's worth clarifying at this point as well that when we're assessing a study for inclusion on the wiki, we only require two things. So it's a really low threshold for entry. So first is that it's something to do with copyright, and second, that it contains sufficient empirical material. So usually meaning that the methodology has been justified or articulated in some way, whether that's qualitative or quantitative research. And even though copyright obviously has its roots in law, we don't limit ourselves to just legal studies. So we also include studies that are from economics, information science, cultural studies, increasingly fan studies. There's even a couple from psychology. So it's a big interdisciplinary project. And we also don't make a judgment on the quality of the work or the methodology that's employed when we're assessing a study for the wiki. So we aren't just basically cataloguing studies that we agree with. If it's on here, we're just providing you a sort of entry point to steer you to the study and make your own judgments on how robust or persuasive that you think it is. And since 2017, we have been using a series of keyword searches on Google Scholar Alerts to identify our studies. So this works quite well as a method. We managed to source about 100 studies a year using this. And in terms of how comprehensive it is, in 2018, the University of Illinois kindly did a review on the studies contained on the wiki, and they only found that there was, I think, 3 or 4 missing studies in this catalogue of empirical work. So we like to think it's fairly comprehensive based on that. But we also want to open the wiki up to crowdsourcing of studies through this propose a study function you see here. We know that there'll be plenty of people out there that have their own little kind of specialist knowledge and topic gardens that can help us grow. So you'll see that this directs you to a really simple form that you can fill out if you know of a study that should be here. If you do have anything that you would like to suggest, please absolutely feel free to get in touch. We also have specific rules for coding studies and the elements of studies that we pull out to catalogue them and make them more usable and searchable in a useful manner. You'll see immediately on this landing page that we have some of the key categories. So industry, for example, which is based on the categorisation of the creative industries developed by the UK Department of Digital Culture, Media and Sport, or the DCMS, back when the wiki was created. So basically you can click here and see everything that we know about how copyright and music work together in reality. And kind of foundational to the wiki, we also have this set of policy issues that you see here are categorised thematically A through F. So these are the copyright issues that we think can help inform public policy and debate, and hopefully ultimately produce better laws that better promote our creative industries. So this includes issues relating to the nature and scope of exclusive rights, copyright exceptions, mass digitisation and orphan works, licensing and business models, which will be very topical for the Beyond conference, fair remuneration and enforcement. And you'll see that there's more detail on the specific topics that are dealt with in each of them. So for example, in enforcement, you'll get lots of studies to do with notice and takedown, for example, or court data or infringement rates. So if you're interested, for example, in how piracy affects the creative industries, this is where you would look. And of course, lots of studies will exist in more than one category. There's lots of opportunities for overlap and interplay between these thematic issues. So for example, if you're interested in piracy, you would certainly be looking in category F for enforcement. But if the study also talks about, for example, how people lose money as a result of piracy, if there's sales displacement, it might also find itself in the category for fair remuneration. And I should note here that whilst the wiki is certainly a collective effort, and that's part of the beauty of it, with lots of different coders that maybe have their own interpretations of what a study says, we do have also strict and detailed guidance included in this coding document about what we code, why and how. So there should be a good degree of intercoder consistency, and you can expect that throughout the wiki, and you can explore this in detail in your own time, of course, if you're curious. And now, in terms of how to search the wiki, it's obviously an intimidating task. We have 800 studies. There has to be a way to narrow this down and make your search more manageable. So first off, we have the semantic drill down feature, which basically is the kind of explore function of the wiki. And this is what allows you to fine tune your search by all these kind of granular issues that we code for. So perhaps if you're only interested in studies from a particular country or on a particular policy issue, you can basically search by that, and you can combine different factors to create a more tailored search. So for example, if you only want to see studies that are about photographic activities, you can click that and you'll scroll down and see everything that we know about copyright and photography. If you want to be more specific and say, I just want to know about how licensing and business models work with photography, you can narrow it down even further. And then you can click on the study name from there, and this will show you the study page that lets you read about the study in more detail. So here we have an excellent one that was co-authored by Chris on the value of Wikimedia imagery. And the idea is that on this one page, you basically get a snapshot of everything you need to know about that study at a glance. So to save yourself the hassle of reading the whole thing yourself. We include things like the abstract, which is copied verbatim, the main results of the study, which the coders summarise in their own words. So that will include things like statistical findings or conclusions, and the policy implications only where we can reasonably interpret them from the text. And this is treated quite strictly. If there's any doubt about the implications, we just tend to leave this empty. And you'll see that we capture much more granular information as well about things like methodology and data, if that's the type of thing that interests you. So you can see how the study was done, what kinds of participants were involved over what time period, whether it used a qualitative or quantitative methodology, where the study was conducted. And we also try to be transparent about sources of funding where it's stated in a study. One other the other interesting things that we kind of code for is the key related studies. This is where the study makes a reference to another study. And if it's on the wiki, we can capture the ways that those studies are interrelated and talk to each other. So you can see here that we are linked to another study by Chris in the same year. And we tend to give prominence to the studies that are cited basically prominently or most frequently in a text. And you can see then, for example, how often a governmental report might cite academic research and how they talk to each other. And you can also use the links here to navigate to other studies on the wiki. So if I click on Chris's name, it will take me to all of the studies that he's got here. And you can do the same through the semantic drill down function. So there's lots of different points of entry. So the semantic drill down is great for if you basically need a starting point for a literature review. And that's in part how we build the wiki as a dynamic literature review tool. You can see quite quickly the body of the studies that we have here about copyright and business models and photography, or TV programs and piracy, or you can see all the work that's been done by a particular author. And from there, you can explore the studies, find the other studies they relate to, and you basically have this big snowball effect. But if the semantic drill down isn't specific enough for what you're looking for, it's also possible that you can search the wiki using text. So it's fully text searchable as we build in the headline. So say for the purposes of today, you want to know everything there is to know about platforms like YouTube and how copyright affects or is affected by it. You can just search in here for platform and you can get your studies that way. And this functionality can be quite a good way of getting around some of the limitations of the wiki, particularly with kind of newer or topical technologies. So for example, if you're interested in social media, you'll see that we don't account for this as an industry in itself, but you can still search for things like Facebook and get all studies relating to that. So the wiki has basically left us with this trove of data, these 800 studies, and it continues to grow. And you can see that the bones of it function well in the sense that you can search for just about anything and get an idea of what's out there. But at the same time, we wanted to make this evidence is accessible and as exciting as possible for people to explore and look for all those meaningful patterns and findings that we're sure are in there. So there was this question of how do we visualize these 800 plus studies, see how they're distributed across all these different categories, and how can we make it so that people can use this in a really meaningful way. And that is where I'm going to now hand over to Bart to talk to us about the bigger wrapper project we have with our visualization tool. So I will stop sharing my screen.
Thanks very much, Amy, and hello everyone. I'm Bartolomeo Meletti, also from the Create Center at the University of Glasgow. So yeah, as Amy just mentioned, I'm now going to share my screen, and to conclude our presentation, I'll show you the second main component of the Copyright Evidence Portal. So the first one is the Copyright Evidence Wiki, which Amy just presented, which you can access here. And next to that is the Copyright Evidence Visualization Tool. So the Copyright Evidence Visualization Tool is built upon the Copyright Evidence Wiki that Amy just presented, and is designed to help you detect trends and patterns across the over 800 empirical studies currently available on the Wiki catalog. As you can see, when you click on the Evidence Viz button, the tool interrogates the database every time you open it on a browser. So, if new studies are added to the Wiki, then they will automatically show also on the visualization tool. And as you can see here, the tool is organized into 5 tabs. The first one is the Studies Overview tab, and it gives you a snapshot of the over 800 studies currently available, and in particular the jurisdiction, industries, and policy issues that they relate to, as well as a timeline of publication of those studies. So here, for example, you can find a list of jurisdiction. You can already see that most studies available are related to the US jurisdiction, 281 of those. But I think, probably the most interesting component of this tab is the industry and policy issue grid. So Amy mentioned that the studies on the Wiki are categorized by 6 policy issues and 16 creative industries. So say, you're interested, in a particular policy issue like exclusive rights in a specific sector, like the film sector, then you click here on this tile, and you find that there are 50 studies that relate to that sector of the creative industries and that policy issue, and you can immediately see that most of them relate to the US, followed by studies with a global dimension and studies about Australian and UK jurisdictions. You can also see here, when those studies were published in the timeline, and then if you scroll down, you find the actual results. So you will find the studies as they are on the Wiki, and presented with title, name of the authors, the industries and policy issues they relate to, year of publication, and here you will find a link to the Wiki entry, so like the pages that Amy just showed, as well as a link to the original source of the paper here on the right-hand side. As you can see from this list, most of these studies relate to more than one creative industry and more than one policy issue. That's basically because of how the grid works. So, if you click on one of these tiles, then, it will generate results that are tagged with those labels. So in this case, film and exclusive rights, but may also include other tags. If you're interested in studies that, specifically address one sector of the creative industry or one policy issue, then you can use the axis. So if you click, for example, here on film, then you will find all the studies on the Wiki that only relate to the film sector, and you can use the grid to see that most of them, of those 31 studies, relate to enforcement, followed by licensing and business models, and nature and scope of exclusive rights. And then you can also do it the other way around. So you can do the same thing with the policy issue. So say you're interested in exclusive rights, you click here, you can see there are 66 studies that specifically address exclusive rights. And again, from the tone of the tile, you can see that most of them relate to the sound recording and music industry. So that's the first one, the studies overview. The following one is the geolocation tab, which is quite self-explanatory. Basically, it allows you to search studies by jurisdiction. So you can do that by clicking on the jurisdiction you're interested in, either from this list or from the map. So say you're interested, in the UK studies or, studies about the UK, you click on the UK and you will find 101 studies relate to the UK jurisdiction. Again, you have the timeline of publication here, which you can also filter by creative sector. And below, you will find the result. On this specific tab, you can't combine the geolocation search with other filters, but you can do, what you can filter down your results by using the search box. So say, for example, you're interested in studies, about the UK, but also about the video game industry in particular, then you can type games here. And those 101, you will find the 27 studies out of those 101 that relate to games. And so, yeah, here the tool will find the studies that either include games as a word in the title or are tagged with the creative industry label called software publishing, including video games. If we then move to the next one, it's called industry and policy issue, and I think is one of the most interesting one. So this one basically allows you to perform basically the same kind of search I showed you with the industry and policy grid, but in a slightly more intuitive and detailed way. Excuse me. So, without clicking on anything here, you can already see interesting things like that most of the studies on the wiki relate to enforcement in terms of policy issue and to the music industry. Then if you click on one of those issues like enforcement, then you can see that actually more than half of the studies on the wiki relate to enforcement, and also that most of them, you can see here on the left-hand side, relate to the music industry, followed by software publishing and film and motion pictures. And then again, if you scroll down, you will find those results. As with the grid, if you, at the moment, the tool would identify all the studies that include those tags. So in this case, enforcement, but may also include other policy issues, like in these examples. But again, here, if you're interested in, studies that, specifically address one policy issue or industry, here we have the only direct matches on filter. So, if you tick that box, then, and you click on one of the policy issues, then you will find there are 271 studies that only address enforcement as a policy issue. And you can then combine that also with only direct matches with the creative industry, the industry categorization. And so you can see there are 67 studies which are about specifically the music industry and enforcement. Another interesting feature of this tab is the method pie chart here on the right-hand side, which basically shows the methods of data collection and analysis which are adopted to carry out those studies. So in here, for example, you can see that studies that relate to enforcement and the music industry, the vast majority of them adopted the quantitative methods of data collection and data analysis. And then if you hover over the external circle, then you can find exactly what kind of method they adopt. So in this case, like those studies, most of them adopted survey research as a method of data collection and regression analysis as a method of data analysis. Then the next tab is called the word cloud, and as you can see here, it's loading because what this part of the tool does is to interrogate and text mine the abstracts of the studies cataloged on the wiki. So here, in this word cloud, you can see the words that occur more often in those abstracts, and unsurprisingly, copyright is the one that occurs more often, and exactly 1,340 times. Then you can filter the word cloud also by type of industry and policy issue. So, for example, if you click on enforcement, you can see that the picture changes, and interestingly, although not surprisingly, piracy becomes very prominent, actually more prominent than copyright itself. But then, if you compare that with another policy issue like mass digitization, you can see how piracy basically disappears from the abstract of those 66 studies. And then again, basically below, you will find always the results on the wiki. And then the last tab is the study network tab, which basically shows you the studies which are most referenced by other studies cataloged on the wiki. So that's an important limitation of this to note here is that these are not the studies that are most referenced in general, but that are most referenced by other studies also cataloged on the wiki. You can use the top bar here to filter number of references. So if you only filter by one reference, you can see it's quite hard to navigate. But say you filter it by 4 references, then it's much more manageable. You can see, what are the top referenced studies easily. And then, and finally, this tab has 2 alternative visualizations. So the one you're looking at the moment is the node visualization, but you can also switch here to a chord visualization. And again, filter by number of references. So yeah, that was, this is the copyright evidence visualization tool in a nutshell. But to give you a slightly more concrete example of how the visualization tool can be used, what you may do and may be able to do, I would like to give you an example of, for example, say, you're interested specifically in business models in a specific sector of the creative industry, for example, the video game sector, and you want to find out, what empirical evidence is available out there about business models in the video game industry. So here, an obvious place to start that kind of search will be the industry and policy issue tab. And as Amy mentioned, the Copyright Evidence Wiki adopts the categorization of the creative industries developed by the DCMS. And in that categorization, video games are included into the broader category of the software industry. So you click on the software industry and you'll find there are 214 studies related to that industry, but we are interested in business models in particular. So we click on licensing and business models and we find there are 46 studies about that industry and policy issue. Then you can jump to the results, but you will immediately notice that most of those studies actually relate to various different creative sectors. But say, you're interested specifically in the video game sector. So again, you can use the only direct match tick box here, click again on software publishing, and then, you identify there are 13 studies which are just about the software publishing industry, possibly also about video games and licensing and business models as a policy issue. Then say you want to get a flavor of, what those studies are about more specifically. So what kind of topics they cover. So, in this case, there are 13 studies. So one thing you could do is just go through the list of studies and, click on the wiki entry and see, and their policy implications and so on. Or alternatively, you can text mine the abstracts of those studies to identify patterns and trends, and you can do that using the word cloud. So, on the word cloud, if I perform exactly the same search again, so only direct matches with the software publishing industry and licensing and business models, from the word cloud that search generates, I think you can already notice a few potentially interesting things. First of all, software is clearly dominating the word cloud, way more than copyright itself. Actually, copyright is almost impossible to find. Software is mentioned 43 times. And then, following software, you can see that piracy is quite prominent, and it occurs 12 times, and also open and source are quite prominent. They both occur 12 times, so that will probably indicate the 2 terms are used together as open source. So piracy and open source seem to be the most recurrent words in those 13 studies, but then you can find other quite prominent words like income, which is quite interesting, and also social and media are also rather prominent. And again, the fact that they both appear the same number of time, 8, probably indicates they're used together. So, from this very quick exercise, one intuitively could say, okay, then, those 13 studies are probably about mainly software piracy and open source software. And there may be also some studies here about social media and income. So then, the next thing you can do is actually to check that in the actual list of results. I already done that, so I'll sum up the results. But yeah, if you then look at the list, that kind of intuition is confirmed to a certain extent. So out of those 13 studies, 4 are about open source software, like this one you're seeing on screen. And there are other 4 which are about software piracy. One of these about software piracy is also about the relationship between income inequality and piracy rate by Won and Yang. And actually that abstract includes the word income 8 times. So that, explains why income was quite prominent. And then there are also 2 studies which are about social media, as we could expect, and in particular about the terms and conditions of social media services like Facebook. So that covers 10 studies out of 13. Then the other 3 studies are, there is one which is about the role of copyright and trademark in PC software industries. And then the remaining 2 are specifically about the video game industry. One is here, which is a study about value creation that is generated by complements in the video game industry. And the other one is on the previous page, which is about the status of user co-creativity as labor. And that's an ethnographic study conducted in Australia with a game company. So, that's, of course, you can't draw sort of, a final conclusion from this quick exercise, but I think that shows you how, you can use the copyright evidence visualization tool to easily and intuitively identify, interesting entry points, for your research or, for your own interest. Right. So I hope that all worked. I couldn't see your faces while I was doing that. Yeah. That was my bit, and I'll hand back to Amy.
Yep, thank you very much, Bart. We've seen you and heard you the whole time, so it was certainly a success. And with that, on that note, we have concluded our demonstrations of the Copyright Evidence Portal, and so now we would really like to hear from all of you guys and your own thoughts on what we've presented today, whether that's questions about how this works or how we made it, or if there's any burning questions you've ever wanted to know about copyright in the creative industries, you can use the chat function and we'll try to answer it using our tools. But I can already see that there's been a kind of lively chat going on whilst Bart and I have been presenting. So I don't know, it seems that Martin and Chris have been monitoring this. Is there anything that you would like to draw out from those discussions before we carry on?
There were. Can you hear me, Amy?
Yep.
Oh, good. Okay. There were some really science fictional questions in there that folks were asking about distributed ledgers and copyright. Obviously, the Bitcoin technology and those related technologies are exciting and interesting things. And somebody else was talking about the metaverse, and other people were talking about DRM. Somebody was talking about co-production. So those are all topics, keywords definitely that have coverage on the wiki. I don't know if you want to pick up any of those 4. I don't think there will be anything on the, as I explained, on distributed ledgers, because it's slightly more recent technology, but certainly on DRM and on co-production, there should be some interesting stuff.
Certainly. We can have a wee look just now if you like. I obviously can't see anything that's going on in the chat anymore, so I'll hope that you can drive me here a little bit. So we have a slightly different showing for DRM than the 500 plus studies that I think that Tom had said he'd identified using the wiki. This is a kind of limitation of the search function for the visualization tool, but also makes it a little bit more manageable as a sort of starting point. There's only 4 studies because I believe the search tool only looks through the title or the abstract, whereas the wiki has the full search function, which is probably why you get a slightly more intimidating number. Let me just check. DRM. Yeah, okay.
So, as Chris already indicated, the academic research is slow firstly, you have to identify the issue, then you have to do your research, and then it has to go through a peer review process. So if there's a new technology, there's a 3 to 5 year time lag till we actually have empirical knowledge about it, and this is obviously a problem. If you make policy in a fast-moving field like this, and you have a 3 to 5 year time lag, there's an issue. So we catalog preprints as well. Where we assume that they satisfy minimum standards of quality. So we try to shorten that, but if you search for blockchain or for artificial intelligence, you will not find a lot. But what will you? But still, you will find what is the body of accumulated knowledge now, about incentives, about innovation, about particular sectors. So the context is important, and it's also important for being able to ask questions without starting from square one.
And I think on that note, if we're still waiting for some questions to come in, I'm happy to talk a little bit about, as you say, Martin, the sort of patterns that we can kind of see already in this existing body of evidence, unless there's any burning questions that are waiting. So I just wanted to offer some examples of how you can get a glance at sort of snapshots of what's going on in different creative industries, because I think it can look quite different depending on what specific sector you're looking at how copyright works. And so these are ways of offering different entry points into the state of evidence in particular fields. So for example, just to follow up on Bart's discussion about software publishing and video games, if we look here for just software publishing, video games and the word cloud, you see that it's kind of dominated by the enforcement factor. So mostly we're concerned with, as the word cloud suggests, software piracy. But what's interesting here, I think, is that the word cloud reflects more of a skew in terms of the types of data that tend to be collected around this, and it can be a cautionary tale about looking too much into what you see here without further investigation. So the wiki isn't necessarily offering you a conclusion about software piracy as such here, rather than it is just steering you towards the direction to make your own judgments. But that brings with it some of the research baggage as well. It can reflect methodology rather than kind of conclusions. So for example, here you can see that students appears quite prominently, and this isn't necessarily because students are the most prolific software pirates, but rather because most of the studies that are conducted here use students as participants. So usually if the research is taking place in a university, it's a sample of convenience. It's students that are being surveyed. And you can also see words like moral, for example, but this isn't necessarily saying that software piracy is, a moral thing, but actually in the bigger context of the study's methodology, it's actually to do with the approach of the researcher, who tends to ask students specifically whether they think software piracy is morally justified. And you can see the sort of influence here with other keywords like attitude or influence, intention as well. These are the other kind of keywords that are usually directed towards people. Would you be influenced by your peers if it came to software piracy? Would you be more likely to do it if your friends were doing it? And having coded many of the studies that are here, I was pleased to actually see that this word cloud has pulled out this pattern and methodology, that what we know about software piracy, the empirical evidence we have about it, isn't necessarily based on sort of the generic public, but actually a very specific subset of society, so just basically students. Some other kind of interesting industry specific things. So for example, we can look at books, which are an important point in transition just now. We've got the big changes from the physical carrier to the digital medium, that's bringing with it lots of different licensing and business models. So we would expect to see lots of discussion about this, but when we look at the evidence we have in this category, which also includes different types of periodicals, you can see that we don't actually talk much about books at all, so much as we're talking about news, and we're talking about aggregators, and I think Google as well. So it seems we're less concerned with how to make copyright work for ebooks, for example, and more about how Google distributes news. So we'd have to be mindful of the lessons that we can learn from this category and how the conclusions of these studies would work for other mediums. And then lastly, the last kind of interesting snippet to show you is from the TV industry. So there's much less studies. You can see here there's only 4, so it's a very, very small sample. But from this small sample, you can see that studies specifically about TV and copyright tend to be focused on these specific named actors like Amazon. I believe that NBC is somewhere there as well. And even more specifically, you can see Thrones. Game of Thrones is the sort of culprit here. And basically just a reflection of the very disruptive effect that Game of Thrones had on distribution, on piracy when it came to TV series. And so you can see the sort of skew evidenced here in that little word cloud. So it's a little snapshot of the time that we're living in. So that's one way to kind of approach this from the kind of creative industries perspective, looking at snapshots. And I'm happy now if there's been any more questions. Obviously, I can't see what's happening, but happy for Martin, Chris, or Bart to feed any of the questions forward to try out with the visualization tools.
Yeah, I can run my screen for a moment.
Okay, perfect.
So I thought, so there are a couple of questions. So one was from Caroline Wright on Spotify and YouTube, and whether the change in business model, has not made some of these copyright questions redundant. And again, Miriam's a similar point. So let's have a quick go at that. So I find my Chrome tab, and here we run. So again, same thing. We are at the home page of the visualization tool, and we try another word cloud search. And to keep it simple, we just do streaming. So streaming, again, we've got this delay. I mean, the technology has been around for 15 years, but it took off much more recently. And so in abstracts, we only find 8 studies which here directly address the relationship between copyright and streaming. And if we then look at the word cloud, we could have a look whether there are particular companies there, whether we can dig deeper by one of these words which the semantic search flags up. So we see again that enforcement it tended to be the important one. So but let's have a look at the business model question. So consumers certainly come up in a bigger way, and we end up just with 2 studies. We seem to have also controlled here for sound recordings. Yeah, that seems they both fall into sound recordings. So what one can do going along this route is then to identify particular studies which one then can open on the wiki catalog. Let me have another look here. Can just pick one of those. I haven't tested this one, so it's a bit risky. Economic analysis of online streaming services. So that's from the beginning. So again, you get the abstract, and you. So there's a study about 2 types of services provided by a monopolist.
So we are still on the visualization tool tab.
Okay.
So,
okay, interesting. So I unstop. Okay, so I'm back in the plenary. So if it opens a new tab, we can't shift over. But but you understand the process. There's some interpretation required. So there's an issue. Business models change in relation to streaming as a new model. And what are the copyright effects? You can then see in which kind of semantic context these questions have been raised. You can select studies which speak to that. You open the study, and then you will understand, what a particular aspect has been investigated. So I assume it's the best way to look at it is it's a quick window into what's the state of the art relating to this field. Okay.
Perfect. Thank you, Martin. My chat box has frozen after trying to boldly submit a response through it. So I'll have to trust any other panelists to feed any questions forward, or if anyone's wanting to do any demos of anything that's been asked.
I think we can have a discussion also of some of the points. I think we all may have a view, so who is our audience here? Who do we do this for? And I think we started it really with the ambition that, copyright policy, was driven by anecdotes, and there must be a better way of doing it. But this is also, clearly has interest for the creative industries and businesses themselves. So it's not only for the policymaker. If you want to know, what's the change at a particular time in a particular sector, it can be helpful, but you have this delay. So for businesses, it could be potentially quite frustrating. We can see that in some of the interesting questions, the metaverse question, or some of the other blockchain questions, but whatever came up. So how do we deal with this? So how do we deal with making this resource valuable? So one idea we had is that we basically would create kind of evidence summaries. So we would write over the next year 21 short evidence summaries on topics, drawing on the wiki. One could probably do one on artificial intelligence and point more to what are the gaps in the evidence and what research should be done. So maybe that way maybe one way of addressing that. But my colleagues, we all work on this wiki and the visualization tool together, and it's also at the moment funded by the Policy and Evidence Center for the Creative Industries, the PEC. So the visualization tool, the data text mining functions, they have been supported by creative industries relevant concerns. So any thoughts my colleagues have on this particular issue?
I just made the comment in the chat that we're really keen to reach out to different stakeholder groups in these kinds of ways, including policymakers, creative industries, practitioners, and their representative groups. And somebody asked, sort of what's next for the wiki. I guess we're going to be always adding new studies, but also looking and exploring ways to improve the usability, to make it relevant and more accessible to wider groups. And that's part of Bart's amazing work with the visualization tool, because it takes something that's quite clunky and text heavy and turns it into something that's graphical. I think that's the kind of direction we want to keep moving in, making the different ways of accessing and benefiting from the information in there.
Yes, absolutely. Accessibility has been key, and I think I alluded to that in our introduction, that part of the challenge with copyright is that it can be very technical, and trying to make that digestible to non-specialists can always be a bit of a challenge. So any feedback in that respect is always sort of appreciated as to whether what we're explaining and how we're conveying it is making sense. So I also seen an interesting question in the chat that maybe our co-founders could speak to a little bit about whether there's any other projects that basically use this wiki system in a similar way. Were we inspired by any other projects that's starting out, or is it a system that could be used for other areas of academic research? The kind of natural way forward, I think, sometimes is to look at the trademark wiki or the patent wiki, but I guess I'm wondering, was there any other sources of inspiration at the outset of making it, or anything to learn for future projects like this?
And from my side, the reason we adopted the wiki was because we wanted to be user-led and transparent about what we're doing. And I didn't see a model out there. I felt that there was really a gap, particularly if you have a new emerging field, interdisciplinary field. If you want to create almost an accepted state of the art in an emerging field, you need to find, I wouldn't say a consensus, but you need to find a way to talk to each other, and that was why I thought this might be an interesting approach. But Chris, we had many discussions at that particular moment. Does that reflect what we discussed?
The MediaWiki software is incredibly powerful because it allows things like extensions, and it's also recognizable. People know what Wikipedia is, and so it's instantly something they can get into. But it's incredibly hard to work with. It's very different from other kinds of platforms and software, and that's been a challenge, to do. In terms of academia, there are some academic projects that have used wikis before. I know there's a digital methods summer school in the Netherlands, and they have a wiki that they use for building papers and sort of doing collaborative writing. It's really interesting how they use it. But they're not that many. I can't think of any others off the top of my head. So maybe we're helping to move the MediaWiki into a new domain of use.
I mean, one of the challenges is once you set the categories, you're bound by them. So the semantics constrain what you can do. So DCMS changed their categories, how they statistically capture the creative industries. So games now has got their own category. So we would have to recode 800 studies to pull this out. But through natural language search, you can still pull the games out of the wiki. But there's always this tension. So I think it's an interesting point. It's an interesting point to what degree is the exercise of the wiki itself a knowledge creation process. But that's probably not the right discussion to have, but I assume it's an R&D conference. So I assume we learned a lot about how you establish a body of knowledge going through this process. And I think all our PhD students who code have a much sharper view of the world. If you can't express your findings clearly, it's not a good idea to write.
we should all have a go and try to edit a Wikipedia entry. It's not that easy. It's a different way of thinking, like you say.
I would certainly support that sentiment. It's a challenge. And I see the latest question in the chat from Miriam about how do people find out about the tool. Well, hopefully people have found out about it today. I would certainly say this has been the official sort of public launch. So our promotional activities, I'm sure, will only step up from here. And as Chris mentioned, to keep an eye out for the 21 projects where we'll have our kind of short topical blogs on different copyright areas, which should be nice and digestible for people to get interested in. So that is the plan forward.
And we're also open to suggestions, I guess, from the audience on how we can promote, our tools, like the visualization tool as well. I mean, today is officially the public launch, but it's not set in stone. The idea is that it's a dynamic tool that will respond to user needs. So, the next steps is to, make it, increase its usage through conferences like the Beyond conference, through, campaigns like the 21 for 21. And so, if you are going to play with the tool, you have any comments or suggestions, please get in touch and let us know. That's the idea, to make it as useful and accessible as possible to not just academics, but policymakers, creative industries, and so on.
Yep, absolutely. And just as we're getting almost to exactly our finishing time, we've been very timeous and diligent with our timekeeping skills. Is there anything else from any of our panelists that we would like to feedback, or any outstanding questions any of us have spotted to answer, or should we just leave it on the happy note of please get in touch?
Yes, yeah, our channels remain open, and we will respond to feedback.
Absolutely. I can put our little, I don't know if this has already been communicated, but we are here at Copyright Centre. I think Chris has his own handle and Bart has his copyright user handle, but you can certainly get in touch with us through Twitter or the Create website, or using the tool as well. But no, other than that, if we're all happy, I will just thank you very much to everyone for their kind attention today. And I was going to say enjoy the rest of the conference, but my understanding is that it will be wrapping up tonight. So yes, enjoy what's left, and thank you again to everyone.